pontificating on pro wrestling, the innovator of Talk NWA, he is J. Cal!
Okay. Hey guys, this is the Alliance Guys podcast. I am your host, J. Cal, and with me today is none other than David Marquez. David Marquez's history with the National Wrestling Alliance spans over what, Dave? 30 years?
Give or take.
And we've tried to do this podcast a couple of times, but my own human error has led to this not working out so well. So I really appreciate Dave taking the time to join me today to do this podcast, because of course there's so much knowledge of the National Wrestling Alliance inside of that head of yours, and I'm sure people have lots of questions that don't normally get to be asked. So today I'd like to ask you some questions.
All right, go for it.
So first and foremost, Dave, with COVID-19, I just want to check in the personal aspect of you. How are you feeling? Are you doing okay? Your family okay?
Yeah, everything's great. Outside of working shows, it's business as usual here at the house. For people who don't know, this is the headquarters for United Wrestling Network, so there's a good chance behind me you're going to see some activity and traffic. I'm in a thorough way, and so we're still editing Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, Championship Wrestling from Arizona, and working on all the projects that have been in development, wrestling and non.
So I'm sure that that changes pretty much how you do everything. I know that a lot of the shows are kind of going into, or a lot of your shows are going into replays and reruns. What, if anything, are you able to do in terms of adding additional content today, adding more to those existing shows, or is it just going to be a rerun just verbatim how it was initially?
Well, we're adding new graphic elements to it. There's some PSAs running through the program. If people have been watching, you'll see, reminders to wash your hands and follow instructions and wear masks and all that. There's some of the shows, the syndicated. Well, there's the mass syndication of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and there's about 5 markets that are specific that every week they get their own original stuff. So Memphis, San Francisco, Amarillo, places like that. So that's being updated every week. But our living room here has been turned into a TV studio, much like your place there. So yeah. We don't have access to all of our equipment. So it's very crude, but so is all of television. When you watch the late night shows and these singing programs that you're these concerts that you see on broadcast television, where people are just singing in their homes on a phone or some sort of iPad or something. So that's what we're doing, and but it's pretty much business as usual.
It's funny you bring that up, because I just saw an advertisement for the Disney sing-along tonight on ABC, along with the American Idol, how the contestants are literally in their homes. And it does kind of remind me of, a lot of indie wrestling. In the way I see it is like a lot of the promos where these guys would cut these interviews in front of their brick wall in the house or out in the backyard, and it just kind of reminds me of that that guerrilla style of filmmaking, if you will, to do TV these days.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that we try desperately to make the program look as professional and high quality as possible, and then the networks go ahead and say, "Yeah, your smart device is good enough." So for years, I fought general managers at TV stations and bosses and whatnot who were like, "Oh, my kid can shoot that better on his phone." And I was like, well, "How the hell can you do that?" Well, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, and the rest are saying it is better.
It's just real crazy, and I understand, the way we do business for everything has changed right now. It's affected my personal 9 to 5. It's affecting your industry quite severely, and it really has impacted so many different people in different aspects of life. And one of the nice things about the wrestling is it's always been somewhat of an escapism. Fans who, punch in, punch out, from work, come home and turn on TV and watch wrestling. And it's one of those things where WWE is still able to produce their content. AEW still producing theirs. I think I read recently that Impact is also still producing content. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that might be unfair for guys like you or guys like, I'm going to go ahead and say you are part of the NWA and promotions like Ring of Honor or MLW who don't have that same kind of access?
Well, the thing is, I think if we all wanted to go back into production right now, we could. With sanctions being lifted and rules changing by the minute, like here we are on a Monday in Southern California, and our government it says the beaches will open up by Wednesday. So it's whether it's good or bad, it's going to happen. So if we wanted to, and Ventura County is open already, and that's where our facilities are, the Ocean View Pavilion. So weeks ago we could have gone back into production. But we're being a little more cautious in what we do. Sinclair has already made it public that Ring of Honor, they're not going back into production until they have people to put in the crowd. So whenever that is. Impact, they're shooting their stuff in Nashville. They did last month as well. I think MLW is also down. They're not producing new television right now either.
Right.
But I think if they wanted to, they could. This late, I say this late in the game, but it's. I think we are far enough along to have made the decision whether or not we want to do it. And since we don't have a crowd, there's a way that, at least on our end, we're looking at how to produce these, so we don't have to have 40, 50 people in the theater at any one time. We can stage these things out and have guys that are just important to be in that match and then send them home and then bring the next guy in and shoot another match and shoot another match and shoot another match because we have no one to entertain live.
And you've mentioned this to me offline in the past, but you have a really good working relationship with the people that own that building, the Ocean View Pavilion.
Sure.
You guys could probably be doing those matches throughout the week, couldn't you?
We can be in there all day, all night if we want. That's we have a great relationship there.
So is that something that at the very least is being discussed, or are you still kind of waiting to get a live audience back into the Ocean View Pavilion?
No, the reason I haven't rushed back is because we don't necessarily have anyone screaming at us to produce new stuff. And I'm not saying that people aren't paying attention because our ratings are fine and our advertising is fine. And the stations that we're on, they've not come to us and said, well, these shows aren't, they're reruns or whatever, so we're not going to run them anymore. It's just a moral thing where we're just taking a second, taking a breather, making sure that it is safe, and to go back and do it. I think WWE and AEW are doing a great job with what they're doing, from safety measures, from what I hear about from friends that work there, and everything that they're doing to ensure that we can do too. It's not too difficult. We have doctors that we can have there on staff, and the theater is already sanitized every time someone comes in or out of that venue. Because during the day, when it's not a theater, and right now this is closed as well, it's an adult daycare facility for mentally challenged adults. So it's a state-ran facility, and they have their own health issues or health criteria that they have to live up to. So they're already ready to go.
So with that being said, it's still I guess we could assume it's still a while away for a return for Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and Championship Wrestling from Arizona.
Well, the way Arizona's looking, I think they're open up. I think we can do stuff in Arizona based on what their government. I saw either a tweet or something on Instagram from the Nile Theater talking about putting more covered canopies in front of the theater.
I'm still here.
Okay.
Just tech issue.
Okay, in front of the theater. And so, because there's a coffee shop right next door to the Nile that's connected. So they're talking about the Nile coffee shop. So they're up and operational, it looks like. And if we wanted to, we can probably go in there and shoot without people anytime.
So I guess then that just begs the question, when do you think you'll be doing that?
I'm going to give it another 2 or 3 weeks because we don't have to promote anything. Like, we can just go. We don't have to have people in there. So we can do it tonight. So when the time's right. And again, if let's just say out of the blue, we're hit with a really big sponsorship, or someone wants some sort of programming or a network, or somebody comes to us and asks us to provide something, then we would heavily consider that. But again, there's no major need for something new because we have nowhere to build to, whether it's a Coastline Clash, which is what we were going into, or the first anniversary birthday bash in Memphis, which we were like really sliding into that.
Right.
And that was going to turn into its own local thing after a while. We were testing the waters to see if it could be a promotion much like Arizona, but a Memphis version, where the Hollywood show would take less of a front and center, and we'd concentrate more on the locals in Memphis.
Yeah.
So, and that's the same thing we're working on in Amarillo. So, and that's why we partnered in San Francisco with West Coast Wrestling Connection, is for the point of putting on these local matches intertwined with the United Championships and stuff. So, when the time comes.
Well, and I guess, that's got to be good enough for right now, because we just don't know. Nobody knows. Nope. And there's no talk about a cure being readily available, and so it's just one of these things where it's going to, it's not the market that's going to dictate when you get back into it. It's really what the government says you can do, which is it's kind of a weird dichotomy, right? Because when you went to promote that big event in China, it was all about appeasing the local government, and here it is in the United States. Because of this pandemic, things have changed so strangely. Again, the world of professional wrestling kind of has to adhere to a more regulated style of promoting, not unlike what you had to deal with in China.
Yeah, it's I'm happy with what the government is doing first and foremost. And when they say it's okay, we'll be ready. The people I'm watching in entertainment is Disney. So when Disneyland or Walt Disney World announces their parameters of reopening the parks in North America, that's going to be my cue of what we can do with people. In the theater, luckily, we can accommodate, every other seat or 6 feet apart or whatever you want to call it. We can do that. You've been to the theater; it's large enough. We can put those people in there comfortably. If we have to skip a row, we can skip a row. We have to skip 2 rows. We can skip for 2 rows. The theater is awfully large. It's the seating is actually set up for about 600 people in total. So when we block for the Hollywood show, it's only blocked for about 180 to 200 people. So the rest of the seats are covered on purpose so that we could have a focal point for the cameras and not people scattered all over the place.
Right.
Well, now that's going to change a little bit. All those years of me yelling at people to move around and fill seats is kind of ironic now. But yeah, when the time comes, we'll be ready.
So let's roll the gears back a little bit, because Championship Wrestling from Hollywood has been on television for well over 10 years now. Has been doing swimmingly as far as I can tell, whether it be talent walking away from the show or behind the scenes creative people walking away from the show, the machine still keeps running. Just recently you guys announced that Carmine Despiro is now part of the creative. He's head of creative, I believe. Mm-hmm. And he actually was part of your creative team when you guys were running in arenas back in 2006, 2007, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. So yeah, Carmine's a part of it. And, he was part of NWA Midwest with Ed Shubin. And, we tried back then to bring everybody together and work together. So I plucked this guy from here and this guy from there and whatever. And we really did our best at doing it. So, but yeah, over a decade, just like you said, it's a long time.
Well, and you say it's a long time, but I blink my eyes and I can think back to being in Yuma, Arizona at the Sunrise Stadium or Desert Springs Stadium. I forgot which the stadium was.
Can't remember what it's called either.
But that was out.
Maybe it was the Devil's Sun Stadium.
And that was in the middle. That was in I think June, the middle of summer, 106 degrees outside at rings at 8:00 when the bell started, and it's just it's amazing for me as someone who's been a part of the ride with you, as a fan, as a journalist, as a podcaster, as a photographer. I've seen you go from doing shows at in a strip mall next to a strip club, and to go from there to where you were 2 years ago in China, having that huge arena filled with people, and seeing those arena shows at the Orleans Arena in Las Vegas or the Celebrity Theater in Phoenix, the shows in Hidalgo or Houston or Kissimmee or Canada or Australia. Dave, you've done quite a goddamn lot, and I don't think people understand how much you've actually brought to the table of professional wrestling. Let's talk about where it started. I don't want to talk about your San Bernardino indie show, but I do want to talk about WLW, World Legion Wrestling. Everyone who is familiar with that promotion knows about the ties to Harley Race, and of course, Gordon Solie was one of your partners when you first started. But how did you get into promoting wrestling in the Midwest? A SoCal kid moving out to the Midwest and promoting wrestling. How does that happen?
Well, out of high school, I never went to college. So out of high school, I basically lied and said I knew how to make television. And a station there believed it, and they hired me. And I didn't know how to make television the right way. So I was stuck in the master control for a little while, and then I went on to directing a couple other things. And then when later, with Bob Costas went off the air, somewhere in the mid-'90s, the station manager came to a group of us, employees, and said, what do you want to put in the place of that show? We have that time back. And it was all week long, too. So they're trying to figure out what to put Monday through Friday in that time slot. It's the same time slot of, I don't know who hosts it now. I don't know if it's Carson Daly still or Seth Meyers or somebody who, it's the later program.
Right.
And I just blurted out, why don't we do a wrestling show? Something else I kind of didn't know how to do, but I had an idea of how to do it, and he thought that was a good idea, and so he gave me permission to do it. And then I just kind of hook or crook started putting things together. And then, I needed a license. I didn't have a license. The station wasn't going to get a license. I wasn't going to personally get a license to run in the state. And then I found out Carl Lauer, who for many years was the vice president of Cauliflower Alley Club. He lived in Rolla, Missouri. He had a license. And so we got hooked up and started, and I remember him from California. He was the promoter of California Championship Wrestling on KDOC, the Olympic Auditorium, stuff like that. It just went and went and went. And when I went to the Cauliflower Alley that year, because Carl pushed me to go, I went, and he introduced me to Gordon Solie. And Gordon was on the board of the CAC at that time. And I just, we were talking. I told him what we were planning to do. And he basically asked me, he was a terrific drunk. He asked me to draw on the back of his drink napkin that his drink was sitting on, how the studio would be configured or how the cameras would be placed. And so I drew what I thought, where the camera should go. And he looked at that and he goes, "Oh, that's good. I'll do it." And that's all it took. He goes, "It looks like you know what you're doing." And I said, "Okay, I guess." And then I went to Harley, and who was also at the CAC, and Harley was a little leery at first, and he was still associated with WCW and managing Vader and whatnot, and told him what I was doing. He didn't.
Hey, Logan.
Hey, it's Logan.
Hey, what's that?
He didn't really believe in it. He said he'd make an appearance, and then Bill Ash in Arkansas, Paris, Arkansas. He and his family used to be the provider of the majority of the wrestling boots in the country. Most of the guys bought boots from him. So he was the very first booker of the show, and that came through Carl. And I can't remember who else. Maybe because we were renting the ring from him. So by default, he becomes the booker. I don't remember.
Fair enough.
But that's where Tim Storm came from. Tim Storm was a part of his group. Yep, that's Nick Bonanno. So Tim was a part of his thing. And we were on the air for a little while. And then NBC pulled the time back. And I came in one day, and my desk, there were all these tapes of World Legion Wrestling. And we were on for a little while. And they canceled the show. And I was, because the time went back to the network.
Yeah.
And I just sat there and I stared at it. I went and talked to my boss. I said, so what is this? He goes, well, it's yours. But I hadn't paid for anything. The station paid for everything.
Wow.
And I said, I own a wrestling company. And we still had tapes that needed to air, and they weren't going to run those. And I said, these are mine? And he said, yeah. And I went, okay. So I went to the Fox station and Channel 27 and made a deal with them. We started running the show there, and we continued shooting outside the studio in a line dancing club called Remington, and a beautiful club. It had just opened. Gorgeous lighting, beautiful place. I think we're the first act in there, and we started just going monthly, and that's how it started. And then Harley and Gordon had me doing stuff with WCW and WWF when they came to town, and then I was doing little bits with Corey Macklin in Memphis wrestling. Stuff like that, all because of knowing Harley. Eventually, actually, after the first show that we ever did, Bill Ash was fired. I fired him on the spot. We could not get along at all. I was producing and directing. He wanted to put the cameras in these goofy places, and we just didn't get along. And then Harley became the booker.
Okay.
Then on my way back to California, working with WCW and doing a lot of freelance work. When WCW was closing down, we knew it was closing down in '99. We basically were told, where do you want to go? And I said, I guess I'll come back to California. And I sold out my percentages to Harley. Gordon was, I don't think Gordon was dead yet, but he was sick. He had throat cancer.
Right. And
so his voice was gone, and he was no longer on the air. And but yeah, that's what happened. That's how I ended up in Missouri and back in California.
Now, you said right around '99 is when you were heading back to SoCal. So when were you out there? Because I've researched it. I've tried to look up the World Legion Wrestling stuff.
I got there in '93. Yeah, 93. So somewhere in the middle there, 90. It's spotty too. I know that the last one that I was involved with, World Legion Wrestling, was probably summer. No, it was warm. So spring of '99.
And see, so as you know, you've teased me in the past about caring about such things, but it's like all that history predates the internet's popularity, at least. So you can't find flyers for those shows. You can't find wins and losses or who appeared when. So it's really difficult to try to track down that information. And even like even if you went to like an internet archive and looked up the old Harley race website, like he didn't even start talking about Legion Wrestling until probably about 98 on his website. And I don't know.
That's about the time when I knew that I was doing more work with other things at that time too. We were making movies. I was just really the production side at that point.
Yeah.
And Harley's wife at the time, BJ, and I did not get along at all. So it was a real easy decision to say, here, go ahead. What I did, part of my exit, was I kept the tapes. So I own all the television because they didn't see any use for it. And I knew the internet was coming and all this other stuff. They thought once it played, it was done, just like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You were done with it. And I kept, what's that?
The LaBelle mentality.
Well, not just the LaBelle. Everybody had
right.
that. I think Crockett would be in the same boat if they weren't in business with Turner. I think once they saw what you can do with an archive and him buying old movies and cartoons and stuff, that maybe we should keep a hold of these things. So like the St. Louis tapes are all that stuff is off television. They're just either Beta or Betamax or VHS recordings. Wow. Boy, I feel like an asshole now because I don't remember his name. He just passed. Larry Medisick. He would just record the show because he was the commentator. He would just record the show, and he kept an archive for himself of his off-air, off the antenna, and that's why what exists of St. Louis wrestling is because of Larry.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
and you kind of think back in the 1960s, VCRs weren't really a popular device to have in the home, and they were very expensive if you did own one.
They didn't exist.
When it was like
videotape came out in the 50s, but not for the house, not at all. That didn't happen until the 70s.
Yeah. Okay.
You have to understand what we called VTRs, videotape recorders. They were or VTP, videotape players, were bigger than this desk I'm at.
Sure.
It's literally this big and this big, and you would have to lace the tape by hand like film.
Wow.
So you had what's called quad tape, so 2-inch tape, and you would lace it, whether it's this way or flatbed, and that's how you would record television. And here's a big nerd piece. Ampex was the first development of videotape recording, and the man who invested tons of money into it and made him super rich, more than he already was, Mr. Christmas Bing Crosby.
Oh, there you go. That's very that's an interesting note, Dave. Thank you for that.
And his show Hogan's Heroes and all those, because I don't know if you know that he produced Hogan's Heroes and a bunch.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the old shows had a slate on the back that said before syndication. It said a Bing Crosby production.
Wow, there you go. So, fast forwarding from World Legion Wrestling, of course, that's when you came out to SoCal. That's when you and I became friends. We first met each other, and I remember you were still taping stuff for Disney at the time. We were at the World Series of all places. The Angels beat the Giants, your team, of course. I was wearing my Angels hat, and you were out there videotaping, and I knew you only from Epic Pro Wrestling as Gucci glasses, and I even yelled it at you, and you kind of looked at me like, who's this asshole?
Yeah, who would know that?
Yeah. But that was kind of fun. I remember that's the first time.
Who coined the frame Gucci glasses?
Excalibur.
Yeah,
AEW's Excalibur. And it was such a crazy time when you came into SoCal. That's really my introduction to indie wrestling, is right about the same time you got out here. So, up until that point, all I ever knew was WCW or WWE, NWA, of course, but I didn't know of, UPW or EWF. All these promotions you ended up working with at some point in some capacity. XPW. There was Revolution Pro out here. There was so many of these little indie promotions, but then you decided to bring a different aspect to Southern California with television. You started with UPW. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with working with Rick Bassman and that label of being a WWE developmental promotion.
Well, when I got out here in '99, Terry Taylor actually is the one who sent me to Bassman. with and Bruce Pritchard. They sent me there, and they were a WWF developmental area. They were never promoted as one, but they truly were. Working with Rick at that time, I never had a problem with Rick because I wasn't a promoter and I wasn't a talent, and I just showed up and I had gear and we had a budget to rent stuff, and so if we needed lights, if we needed cameras, we needed whatever. It depended on the scale of the project or what it was actually for, how much money I got to spend. We officed out of the Galaxy Theater. I don't know what it has a different name now.
The Observatory.
The Observatory. So we officed out of the Galaxy Theater, in Santa Ana, and Rick had the second floor. The whole second floor was UPW, and I was not given a desk. I was given a slab of table, a piece of table, and it was me, webmaster, Samoa Joe, a tech, Joe Schmo, and behind me, talent relations, the Big Schwag. And I think Looney Lane may have been doing something in the office at that time. Creative was it jumped around, but Kevin Quinn, Chris Daniels, Rick, me, who else? There was somebody else that was in there. Oh, and after a minute, like Nova, Mike Bucci, who went on to be an executive with the WWF, which helped our relationship even more. And so we would have to produce stuff for the WWF weekly. So I did all the packages that got virtually everybody signed, because Rick really did get a lot of people jobs. People don't know much about him, but he and I have kind of a similar background. He's from Southern California. He's the guy who was the head of entertainment. Again, I don't think a lot of people know this. He was the senior vice president of entertainment for Pleasure Island at Walt Disney World. So he was booking bands, and he was in charge of all the clubs, all the atmosphere talent, and the guy who brought Eric Bischoff and WCW to Walt Disney World. Like, a lot of people don't know that, but that was Rick. And he doesn't really talk about it either. But he has great stories, and we have similar stories with my relationship with the Walt Disney Company. But so I was constantly making videos, and so when Cena came in, we followed Cena from the moment he walked in to his first promo that I directed, to working out, to haircuts, to sleeping in his VW Bug, to all this stuff. And it just rotated. So if it was Bad Boy Basil, that's who we were shooting. If it was the Russian Nightmare Stas, that's who we were shooting. If it was Hank Hill, that's who we were shooting. I remember I did this thing with Hank Hill where we were going to do dental hygiene with Hank Hill. So if anybody doesn't know who Hank Hill is, think of Schlack, much bigger, but the same amount of teeth. So were you a part of the process that did those documentaries that ended up on, was it A&E? Oh, Discovery.
Discovery, okay.
Yeah, no, the guy's name was Tom Beers, and the company was called Original Productions. And I think about 5 or 8 years ago, he sold his entire production company after Monster Garage. That's why the Big Schwag was on Monster Garage. It was because of Tom Beers.
Wow.
And Tom sold his company to ABC, Disney, for an awful lot of money. And but no, they produced that stuff. And I produced we did a lot of sizzles and a lot of other things to try to get into reality and some other stuff. But a lot of that didn't materialize. But the Ultimate Pro Wrestling home training VHSs, from what I learned now, is basically how every younger modern wrestler got into wrestling, because they bought those tapes. I hear this all the time. I'm just sitting in the back of a locker room, and they're just like, oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I got those UPW tapes. And then I just laugh because I produced those and I shot them.
Wow. That's great.
Peter's back there.
So you go from doing the UPW shows, and then you're doing.
Hey, go ahead.
You're doing the UPW shows, and then now fast forward, you're also working with XPW, right?
Yeah.
Was XPW
so how
first?
the XPW thing started was, so I was doing UPW, and then 2 or 3 years in, something happened, and I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened, but something happened where I wasn't being booked anymore to do video. And there was another company. They had a fish as a logo, Sonic Fish.
Yes.
And there were two guys and a girl. And it was just dog shit production. It was horrible. But I don't think Rick paid them. I think they volunteered doing it. And I had back then, I was opening up relationships with KDOC to put a UPW show on, which they eventually produced. And I just kind of split away myself, and I started working with Kevin Kleinrock, and I gave Kevin a call, and we met up. It's so stereotypical of a first meeting, but I go into the XPW office, which is a porn studio, and I didn't know that. And it's everything that you could imagine a real XXX studio to be. And here I come with my, Disneyland name tag on after work, and I meet Kevin, sweetest guy right off the bat. But when I met him, I went into his office, and he kind of tried to play big shot, which I thought we still joke about it. So his feet were up on the desk like this, and he was looking at me through his shoes, eating. He'll back this up. He was eating matzah. Yeah, it's a big cracker.
Yeah,
he's like a mouse, just. And I'm trying to have this conversation with him, and they were riding so high that there was just an attitude there that, just didn't matter, whatever.
Yeah,
and there was money, and there was whatever. Then I met Rob Black. He laughed at me. He continued to laugh at me the entire time that I worked with him. I think to this day he doesn't know who I am. That's the truth. Even though I did all those Olympic auditorium shows and I did a couple of the TVs, the thing at XPW was you couldn't get paid for wrestling unless you were editing porn. So you had to edit porn on top of the wrestling in order to get a check.
All right.
Yep.
So I imagine you were editing some adult.
Oh yeah, we all had to. Everybody. Webb was stuck in a back room. It was so dark and so scary, and it stunk like cigarettes and porn. And he would come out just covered in like soot, like he was a damn chimney sweep. He was in there all day, all night, because he was trying to get both. He was the editor of all the XPW stuff. So he was the top porn editor there. So he had to do everything. I shared an office with Sylvia. She was like a receptionist, kind of production coordinator, I guess. And then on the other side, you had Ryan Katz, Mr. WWE, and he was running his own thing over there. And it was a pretty interesting outfit. The XPW world and I did not get along. Supreme, who just passed, we didn't have the best interactions because I was a little too square for that environment. I tried. They wanted me to get them on mainstream television, and I was like, I can't. I can't. Let's do this and this and this, and then you can do that. Baby steps. And Rob just wanted to go balls out. ECW did it. Why can't we? Right. I was like, well, they were not extreme the whole time. They were Eastern first, and it's not they paved the way. There's a reason they're not on TV anymore.
Right. So. And then shortly after that, how did you and Gary Yap meet up? That was kind of Gary wasn't really connected to the world of professional wrestling,
no.
But somehow he's promoting wrestling events and notoriously attempted to promote the Super Dragon versus Ultimo Dragon versus American Dragon, Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson. of course, that match never materialized, but you were a part of that as also their TV tapings that happened at the Glendale Studios, a place where you would bring the NWA and tape your shows at. How did you meet Gary, and how did that fall into fruition?
Well, it was during the XPW days for sure. Trying to remember if the Messiah was a part of that somehow. I think he was. But I for people who don't know what I did at Disney, I had several roles. When I first came back to California in '99, I just needed a job. The UPW job wasn't a full-time gig.
Right.
So I needed a job, and so I ended up at Disneyland in guest relations. And then that led me to broadcast services and guest communications and shooting video. That's why you saw me shooting the World Series, because I was jumping around in different departments. So I was still working for Disney. And I don't know if it was Friendster or MySpace or whatever the incarnation of social media back then was.
Sure.
But Excalibur got a hold of me. And this was pre-Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, I think.
Yeah, it definitely was.
And Excalibur, I almost said his real name. Excalibur.
Don't say Mark.
Excalibur got a hold of me because he was doing the artwork for the show.
Okay.
For Gary. He knew Gary because Gary was a director at Film Roman, the animation studio.
Yes.
And he was working on The Simpsons and King of the Hill and other things, commercials and stuff. And Mark thought that Gary and I said it, Gary and I could, that's your fault. Gary and I would be good together. And Disco backed it up, Disco Machine. So I went ahead and met Gary after a shift at Disneyland at the Blue Bayou. We had dinner together. And he met me there. He had an annual pass. He pitched the whole idea of Epic Pro Wrestling to me and what he wanted to do. And then and it's interesting too, because either Excalibur had influence on Gary or vice versa. I just remember Gary constantly saying, I want this shot guerrilla style. I really want this to be guerrilla style wrestling. And I didn't get it at first. I'm a little too corporate. It was just like guerrilla wrestling. Who's ever heard of that? Epic. I understand Epic. Epic.
Yeah.
There's something to that. That's the name of a show. But guerrilla, I don't know. So we met up. We go home. I told him what we need. And then we did a show together. I didn't shoot it. I don't think. I think Paul T was doing the production and stuff at that point. But we did a show at the El Rey.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a part of the behind the scenes of it. And that's what led Gary to believe that I knew what I was doing with television. So then I was the TV director, and Gary and I put these shows together. And I think Excalibur and Gary and, who was the other guy? A creative on that. It wasn't Danny. Somebody else was in on that, and I wish I could remember who. It was so long ago. And I was the TV guy. And then out of the blue, Gary comes to me and says, much like Billy Corgan did later, hey, I want you to be the announcer. And then he put me and Larry Rivera together, and Excalibur. So the three of us were going to be a team for the Epic show. I remember those first tapes at the Glendale Studios. We never got them cut for some reason. None of that ever aired, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't remember airing that. And he had the show was airing on LA TV.
Yeah,
I don't remember the call letters, but I remember watching
KJLA.
KJLA. I don't remember. That was like a bilingual station as well. It was Mexican and English, and they never aired. Huh?
It still is.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I haven't kept up, but
the
I
Hollywood
do know
show in Spanish runs on there now.
Oh. That's great. Okay, small world. But yeah, those shows never made it to that time slot. We never, of course, the Messiah incident where Billy was attacked, and that really changed a lot of things that were going on at that time. Those shows never actually made it to air, and of course, that triple threat match was booked, never happened, and the huge fallout. Gary kind of went away for a while before coming back later. How is your relationship with Gary? Do you guys still talk? Are you on good terms?
Yeah, I guess for the most part we're on great terms. I haven't talked to Gary probably in a year and a half. He would watch the show and the Hollywood program and give me critiques of what he thought, what he didn't think. He's a big Joey Ryan fan.
Yeah.
He was always very critical of what I did with Joe. He thought it was too vanilla. A lot of what I think you see Joey evolved into has a lot of Gary influences today. And then, like people like Marcus Riot was a big Gary creation. And it was
SoCal Tom Walters.
Yeah. Boy, that's somebody.
I knew you're laughing at that. Nobody else watching this right now even knows who that person is, so it's kind of funny. But yeah, so we're on good terms. I want to say, I think he lives in Arizona now. Married, happy, kids, all that stuff. He lived with me for a little while. After the Epic stuff, he quit his job or lost his job in animation and whatnot. So him and his daughter stayed with me for a bit. But yeah, I think Epic was ahead of its time. Yeah,
totally
was.
And what is pro wrestling today. Gary is virtually a godfather of that.
Wow.
I don't think people would think that I would say that, but it's true. An awful lot of what you see in wrestling today is not Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. It is Epic Pro Wrestling.
And the interesting thing about that, Gary kind of returned to pro wrestling a couple of years ago with EWF, and I always thought the whole Man in Black gimmick, I don't know if you followed it, but I always thought that was tailor-made for what you guys are doing in Hollywood.
Well, we talked to him about it, and he talked to me a lot about it, and there were a lot of problems with the Man in Black because several people played him, much like Suicide. Right. So it was just scheduling and ideas, and Gary could be difficult.
Oh, for sure.
And he would get into these creative jags where the only person in the room was Gary.
Sure.
So it was very difficult at times, but I learned how to work with him. We did a lot together. I stopped Adam Pearce from killing him one day in a cul-de-sac. It wasn't a good scene. But yeah, then all that, it led to the Inoki Dojo.
And and I, geez, Dave, we could probably sit here and talk all day, and I would totally enjoy that. But of course, I don't know if all our viewers would, and I'm sure you've got other things to do. But let's fast forward into the Inoki Dojo. Let's sit here and first the Inoki Dojo, then later the Santa Monica Dojo. That was obviously Antonio Inoki, who he wanted to put a group of fighters / pro wrestlers. Essentially, he wanted to create talent that could work anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And you were kind of responsible for bringing that talent and getting them booked not only here locally, but also getting them matches in Mexico with CMLL, as well as getting them ready for their matches in Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Tell us a little bit about the Inoki Dojo days.
Well, so how I even got in there, that was because of Bassman. Justin McCulley was the head coach at the time, UFC Justin McCulley, and he and Rick go back to UPW and myself. Sean McCulley's his brother, and Sean was there too, I think, but not as heavy as Justin. And they were only open for a little while, and they had a handful of guys. And Rick went in there to pitch a UPW versus New Japan show at like the Forum or something. And of course, he wanted the Japanese to pay for everything. And
at the time, he had a lot of big guys on his roster. I mean, Nathan Jones, John Heidenreich.
Yeah, but UPW really was dead at that point.
Oh, okay.
He was promoting a thing called Valor MMA.
That's right.
Which is another headache. I produced a lot of that too. But I remember going into this meeting, and Mr. Inoki was there. Simon was in the meeting. Paul T could have been in that meeting too, now that I think about it. Then there was another guy named Roger, who was an artist who did costumes and masks and stuff. He was from Japan. And then Justin was in the meeting, and Rick made his pitch, and I was there to back him up from a promotions, Harley race, Disney, whatever guy. And they didn't like Rick's idea, but I guess they liked what I had to say, because within a couple of hours of us leaving, Simon Inoki called me and offered me a job, a real full-time job, like leave Disney and come work here with us full-time. And he offered me, it was called the Director of Business Development, was the original title. And I had nothing to do with training at that time or talent or anything. What they wanted me to do was open doors and get them on television and create relationships in North America, just like they had a WCW deal. How can we work with the WWE? How can we work with Impact? How can we work with, all these people? I'm not sure if Impact was around at that time. They could have been. But anyhow, Mexico, Canada, all that stuff. And so I took the job. And instead of driving to Anaheim from the Valley every day, I drove to Santa Monica, which took just as long. And while I was there, I started noticing the dojo system and getting used to the young boy way of doing things, which was very foreign to me. And I didn't agree with it, and I don't agree to it to this day. I knew I couldn't sell, even for who he was then, Bryan Danielson, the Pet Bulls, a baby T.J. Perkins, Bobby Quance. I think that was, and Samoa Joe. That was the dojo. Luckily, we all knew each other, but I knew I couldn't sell them to WWF. Like, I couldn't do that. So to open the door at the WWF to actually get myself some cred, they wanted to do either Chris Benoit or Eddie Guerrero DVD. And there's a bunch of Super Junior footage on that DVD. And I negotiated the deal. The guy's name was Tom Baraka, who was the vice president of, I think at the time it was called the WWF Archives or Libraries or something. And so we did that deal, and we got the money for it. And so I delivered what I said I would deliver. And then Justin McCauley quit. And they came to me and said, well, we need you to run the dojo, the whole thing. I said, all right. At that time, I kind of tried to convince Simon. Mr. Inoki wouldn't go for it, but I tried convincing Simon to just open the door and let anybody in. And we eventually did that, but in the beginning, not at all. You had to be invited. I remember Davey Richards showed up, and they hated him.
That's
Hiroko Inoki, who was Simon Inoki's wife, and Mr. Inoki's daughter, she kicked him out. We invited CM Punk. They kicked him out. It was really bad. The American way of doing it and the Japanese way of doing it, it just wasn't working. And so when TNA started becoming more of a thing, and they were the NWA TNA, I went ahead and was like, I knew that 01 was using Mr. Inoki's NWA membership in Japan.
Right.
And so, being the boss of North America, they weren't going to the meetings. I knew that I can sell the NWA and not New Japan. So that's what I did. So I became the proxy for Japan. I started attending the meetings, and then NJPW once again was recognized as the member of the NWA. And as I saw how that was operating, by the second year's meeting of the NWA, I needed to do more. I already put together the relationship with TNA, and we were trading people, and that was working. And then I created the open door where Carl Anderson and Fergal and the floodgates kind of opened, and I just brought everybody. Australia showed up, all the entire fucking country. Like, everybody started coming in, right. And Canada, and I just opened all this stuff up. And but as I was learning how the NWA ran its votes, much like Congress. Sure. So I said, we were at the meeting, and I got there, and I remember Bob Trowbridge joking with me, and he said something to the degree of, so you have Japan, you could petition and get California too, so that, because that's where you're running. And that's when I kind of went, oh, really? I can be in the NWA and TNA's going, and then I got New Japan, and then I will have 2 votes if I was the member and not New Japan. So David Marquez paid the fee on the spot and wrote the check to become the member in California when it became available.
And the interesting thing about that is, and I'm not sure how familiar you were with the NWA scene in California prior to you joining, but there was a promotion that literally ran at car dealerships.
Yeah, consumer cars. Yeah, I forgot the guy's name. It was here in Hollywood.
Yeah, he was more out in my way now. He was out in like Beaumont and Banning, and did shows like in just crazy all the way out here in the practical desert and practically Mexico, practically Arizona type places. And was using talent from Revolution Pro. I mean, not bad guys to use by any stretch of the imagination. And from the people I know that worked on those shows, they all got paid handsomely to do these shows. But ultimately, it was not what you would consider NWA caliber pro wrestling.
Well, maybe for the time it was, because at that time the NWA was nothing to talk about.
That's for sure.
And then the other promoter in California was Zach Reeb.
Yeah, PCW. He ended up working for you, didn't he?
He did. It was somewhere around the way. He sure did. It wasn't a bad interaction, but he was the guy who was the member before me. He lost it, and I picked it up. So I knew that I can have 2 votes, and that's when I became the member. And then I started seeing the writing on the wall with Impact, TNA. It's not fair to say Impact, TNA, and I saw how the company operated and how backwards it was, and it really was red state, blue state. People would congregate and collect votes. We would have forged proxies. We would have faxes coming in at the last minute with these signatures that don't match, and we can't verify anything. Wow. That's the truth. So there was a lot of stuff going on.
Recently on the Alliance message board, which is actually still a thing, believe it or not, and Fred still posts there quite regularly, somebody made a comment about Bill Behrens losing the presidency and Ernie Todd getting elected. And I know that was right around the time you were a part of the NWA. Do you remember that time frame and how that came about?
Well, it was a vote for sure, and it was in Winnipeg, and I'm sure they promised Ernie the world. Fred leading that charge, Ernie was a patsy. It's the easiest way to put it. Ernie had money. A lot of people don't know that. He did have money, and he did run a decent loop on native reservations and whatnot. he would tell all of us that he was Aboriginal, and he would always say "miigwitch," I guess, which is goodbye or something, when he would hang up the phone, or his emails were always "miigwitch," which is some Aboriginal word, I guess. And then I was an asshole later at a meeting when he was voted out and Bob was put in, and I went "miigwitch." But I was put up to do that by Schumann. Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff that we did then, but yeah, it was we used to call them midnight meetings, and Fred would be usually the leader with Rick O'Brien. They would pull people together and figure out how to make things go their way, which is why we ended up making Trobich the boss. Because between all of us, it was never going to happen. We couldn't buy paper clips unless 18, 20 people said we could.
Now, I did want to get to this because on one of the lost interviews we did, and gosh, I wish I had that footage because it was great. We were talking about the attempts at various organizations to purchase the NWA. Now, you famously said that you were working with Inoki to actually buy the NWA. Can you tell us that story about New Japan trying to make that bid on the National Wrestling Alliance?
Yeah, that was actually driven by me. So knowing the relationship that was going on with TNA at the time, mm-hmm. The Japanese, they love the NWA, much like people here in the current renaissance and romance with the NWA. It's always going to be there, no matter who you are, what country you live in, it's always going to be there. I make the joke constantly that much like Donald Trump, the NWA could do no bad. Those three letters, doesn't matter what happens, it's okay. And I think the 90s proves that. But I saw how messed up everything was, but I knew who the good guys were too, and the people that I knew who I can work with in the country, including TNA. So Terry Taylor's there, and Jerry Jarrett's still around, and it was right before Dixie Carter, and we made a bid. We brought this woman in, Jane Flood is her name. We brought her in. She was a business strategist. I don't know how we found her, but we found her. And then she started bringing all these stock analyst people and all this highfalutin stuff. But the weird thing was she managed the Great Khali, which is weird.
Yeah.
And he showed up. That's how he ended up going to New Japan, was because of her. Anyhow, we pulled the money together. New Japan put its money together. We had some investments behind us. And I want to say we made an offer of $800,000 to under $1 million to buy the whole thing.
Wow.
And then it went to a vote, and the organization voted it down.
Wow.
And I'm happy it did, to be very honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened, and I don't think that I would have had a say if the Japanese were to have been successful, even though I was the guy leading the charge.
So you think you would have gotten squeezed out of it?
Oh, I know I would have. 100%. I would have. No. I'd say something derogatory, but I'm not going to. So
best you don't, Dave.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have been a good scene. There was already bad feelings starting during that time, and that's when I started running the NWA shows and the arena shows, and TNA was being difficult with the NWA. Everyone within the NWA was like, well, how much money do I get versus the time I've put in?
Sure.
My stock, which there was stock, but it wasn't stock. Right. Jim Miller was fighting every day over dividends and like stuff that didn't even exist. Profit sharing and all this stuff. In a real company, yes, but this is This is wrestling.
Yeah.
And we were individual companies that owned a piece of a belt. Just to be honest,
yeah,
we have a logo and a belt. So, and we didn't even control it at that time. Another company did.
Right.
So it was all messed up.
And then shortly after Ernie Todd was let go from the NWA, there was the promoter, and I failed to look up his name, but he was the
monster truck guy.
Yeah, the guy out of Ohio, NWA Ohio, who ended up changing his name to like WWWA or something like that. Yeah. He made the bid, and he made it public.
It wasn't real though. He never made it to us.
Oh.
I don't remember him ever presenting a money option to us. And he was kind of like a Hermie Sadler, where he got into business with TNA. Because if I remember, I don't know if it was the Naturals, someone came to the ring in that truck. He had a truck that was all NWA decked out, and it wasn't like localized. It was a national, like he bought the company, and this is the truck or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember somebody came to the ring on TNA, and I'm sure Jerry Jarrett thought that he had a money guy right there that he was going to just take. But yeah, that guy was never real. Then there was another company. I don't know if they were out of the Carolinas, but they I believe inquired. Was Ward Family Promotions, I think was what they were called. And then there was another guy in Charlotte, NWA Charlotte, this big guy, I can't remember his name, Costello.
Yeah, JD Costello.
Name. And he was going to be this big savior of something.
The interesting thing about that is around that time, that was when Hollywood was really getting hot. I mean, obviously the feud with
Pierce. Sinclair Broadcasting.
Yeah. I wanted to get to that. I was going to get to that, Dave.
No, but that's all in the same period. Before I forget.
See, I never knew that JD Costello made an offer. I know that they were doing the NWA in Charlotte, and it was a really cool concept. And in some ways, there was a lot of parallels between what you were doing in Hollywood and what they were doing in Charlotte. And I mean, the production was pretty good. Yep. I wouldn't say as good, but pretty.
Well, we were
good.
Consulting with him.
You were at least one of the shows. I remember that, and they were booking the champions. They were trying to make a big deal out of the world champion, all the things you'd want an NWA promotion to do. And then all of a sudden, there was a phone call, and the fire marshal was called, and the show was blocked, and then they never ran again.
I think that was an inside job.
Oh, for sure it was.
Yeah,
it might have been JD Costello that did it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's an inside job.
I don't know that for certain. I'm not making that allegation. I'm just
saying. I am.
Okay, fair enough.
We're like 15 years removed. Fuck it.
Well, and one of my friends, Tim Dixon, was actually involved with the production and commentary. He owns those tapes, and I know that those videos, they're more sentimental than anything else. But I mean, he had championship matches and all that good stuff. And I always felt like that was such a missed opportunity, that if those guys just figured out how to play ball, I mean, they could have essentially been the Hollywood on the East Coast, and in Charlotte of all places.
Yeah, I mean, and I heard this from Vince McMahon himself. It was half joking. He's like, "Oh, you're still in the NWA," and I was like, "Yeah, you're at the Staples Center." And it's not like you just casually talk to Vince McMahon. I had a meeting, and we were just talking, and I had spoke to him many times in the past. He knows my name. We're not buddies by any stretch.
Sure.
But he made a joke, and he's like, you guys can't order a cup of coffee together.
That's brilliant.
And I think he's going back to his days of being a member of the NWA and knowing how difficult it is being a part of a cooperative like that, and why he ended up doing what he did.
Give me just a second, Dave.
Yeah.
Well, looks like the regular camera went out, so the good news is I have another camera to use.
Okay.
Just came in the other day, too.
The battery die?
The battery seems like it's working. It's just, yeah, that's not as good, but oh well. It is what it is. Let me see if I can just adjust it real quick that's a little bit better. Okay. I'll take it. It's better than nothing. So you're talking to Vince McMahon. You guys can't even order a cup of coffee together, and that seemed to be more true as time went on, between trying to keep this deal with Impact or to end the deal with Impact. They had, I do believe that before Dixie was involved, that Panda tried to purchase the NWA as well, didn't they?
No.
Okay.
I think Fred got really in with Jeff, and so I think that's how those conversations or rumors were getting started. Again, man, there was a lot going on. Everybody had something. Everyone had a guy, you know.
Sure.
I was no longer with the Inokis, and I was doing my thing, and Trobich was the boss. And luckily, Bob saw that I wasn't playing around and I was trying to do things legit. And, you know, Bill too. Bill will question a lot of things, but I think when he sees something that's progressive, he'll go along with it. You know, Dave Texera, Dave Republic in Vancouver, Ed Schumann. You know, again, it is literally red state, blue state.
Right.
So all the blue states were seen as allies, and we did a lot of stuff together. And moving forward, that was kind of the plan of how to. So we take the world title, we bring it to the West Coast, we bring the tag titles to the West Coast. I couldn't do that by myself. I had to have the backing of someone, and I had the Ultimates with our executive director. And
as things were progressing, you're doing arena shows now. You know, you're putting these events in the Orleans, which that's not a small place, and people tend to marginalize what you were doing at the time. But the Orleans Arena, the Paul Songus Arena on the East Coast, you're working in arenas in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona.
But we did the Phillips Arena in Atlanta.
Yeah, the 60th anniversary.
Yeah, and
all of these things I see as positive. And I know at the time a lot of people were like cutting these things short, like, hey, you know, big deal, you sold out this, or didn't sell out the arena, but you got this sold show in the arena. Who cares? But it's like, wait, hold on now. Who else is running these kind of venues? Who's able to do this sort of thing?
The interesting thing is that when I started doing that, that's when TNA started following us.
Right.
And they started doing arenas after I did.
And they were doing the same arenas.
The exact same arenas. And they had the exact same guy booking the rooms for them. They came and got our guy.
Oh, really? So as this is all coming about, now it's getting harder and harder to get Christian Cage booked for shows. I believe Jeff Jarrett was also champion at a time when you guys were trying to get him. Yeah, but that was all
politics too. That wasn't it wasn't difficult because we had the money. You know, one of those shows could cost about, you know, just to be honest, $60,000-$70,000 we were paying. Oh. So we can pay them whatever we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with TNA and the NWA is that we made a deal in the beginning that when we were going to book the champion, this is with Jerry, that we were paying for the belt, which we owned, like it was ours. And that was where a lot of confusion comes to play. So instead of a guy, so I think we put the price tag on the world title at $500. Whoever the champion is, that's what you pay him because it's ours.
Right.
And so for a while it worked, but then they went to Fox, and so they felt they were here now. And then they go to Spike. Oh, now they're here,
and
they're doing us the favor, you know. But when Panda took the company, they didn't want us, and for good reason. The whole thing was fucked. I wouldn't want us either. Well, in fact, I didn't want everybody. I tried buying it. So yeah, it just once Jeff, you know, wanted more money, even though we were going by the agreement they wrote. This was not our agreement. This was their agreement. And dollars were going higher. And then all of a sudden they put the belt on Sting. And we were like, we're never going to be able to pay for this guy.
Right.
and none of us did. Ultimately, I think we came to the conclusion that we're going to pay $1,500 or something like that, with the more high-profile people who had the title.
Well, and you did have a few shows. I remember the NWA Liberty States, NWA Pro East, did have those shows with Christian Cage defending against Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett defending the title against. I think he actually defended against Christian Cage on one of your events.
That was in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so you guys did your end of the job, I guess I should say. You did,
and then some.
Yeah, and you honored your commitments. So then there was the falling out, and I know you said red state, blue state. It seemed like that, even to this day, there are still people who still talk about the split and why did you guys split, and why didn't it make sense to continue to work together as two separate companies promoting that NWA World Title?
Well, Fred and his side was 100% trying to keep the relationship.
And what was the benefit to that? I mean, I know there's some dollars, but how much money could you really be making?
He's my friend.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to start arguing about that or even opening that, but
sure.
Yeah, it was all imaginary.
So the split happens, which I think ultimately...
Well, the reason why that happened was because week to week on the television show, I started seeing the NWA disappearing from the broadcast.
You're not alone. Yeah, I saw that too.
I'd watch it, and I was sent there for a long time. I was the liaison. It was Ed Schumann, and then it was Fred, and Bill worked there. So Bill was always in a pickle. And then I was sent from both the New Japan and the NWA side for a little bit. And like the night that not Raven, could have been Rhino,
maybe.
But the night one of those guys won the title, they were supposed to tell us in advance, and they didn't tell anybody. And I remember in the back, right when it's happening, watching the monitor, and Jeff looked me dead in the face, and he goes, "You remember we talked about this, right?" I was like,
shit.
No, not at all. So I saw the writing on the wall, so did a few others. And then I think there was a title match, and I specifically remember Barash ring announcing, saying this is for the World Heavyweight Championship.
No NWA at all.
No NWA. It was the first time they said that. And the first thing I did was call Bob. And that was already late because it was on late here. I think it was on at 9 or something. So it's already midnight in the East. So I called Bob, woke him up, and I said, I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know if there's going to be an internet clip, but we have a problem. And Bob went back to sleep, and sure enough, he agreed with me. And we thought that we fixed it. And then Impact wanted to pay out the remaining balance in the agreement for the term of the agreement. They had like a 25-year license, I guess what you can say.
Yeah.
So they wanted to give us a dollar amount to buy it out, and I was firmly against it.
So what would they have gotten if they bought it out?
These numbers are probably way wrong, and whatever members are still around, like Fred and those, will probably chastise me and say that I'm, making this up. But I think it came down to maybe it was 25,000 a year for 25 years or something.
Wow.
I think. Again, that's my memory's bad too. It could be something else that I'm thinking of, but I think that was it, something in that area. And but I didn't think that we should do it at all, and I was against it, completely against it. And so I got some blue states to rally around me, and we did what we did. We sent Rico Mann, who was Ed Schumann's partner, to Orlando. and he collected the belts. That's why Kurt Angle is not an NWA World Champion.
And it's so hard to try to justify that to people and explain to them why. And
it's not hard. You got to understand it. They voted for Trump.
So moving fast forward, okay. So the NWA splits. You're doing great business out in Hollywood. We're seeing TV. The audience is there. You're not having a problem putting people in the seats, that's for sure. The Cabana Pierce feud is at an all-time high. I want to skip over that black mark on the NWA. I don't even want to talk about it. We eventually get Pierce back as champion. Things are seemingly going well. The NWA's, again, there's this feud, 7 levels of hate, going all throughout the country. You've got Cabana and Pierce, the program you started, the matches you booked, that whole area you built, and you've got people trying to stop that, trying to put an end to that. There was the lawsuit, and I know there's details we don't need to get into, but of course, famously, NWA brethren on your side ended up flipping on the other side. Pro Wrestling Organization loses the lawsuit to International Wrestling Corporation. The licenses, or excuse me, the rights to the NWA, the title, the IP, all of that is distributed to a different company. And for the first time in a long time, instead of being a collective, instead of being multiple promotions, the NWA is essentially 3 people, which then got whittled down to 2 people and then to 1 person. During that time, you were no longer a part of the NWA, and I saw the anguish on your face when you made that announcement in Hollywood, but it didn't stop your business. It didn't prevent you from running your shows. And yes, it did lose a little bit of cachet not seeing the 10 pounds of gold, but you were already working on establishing stars in your area like Scorpio Sky, Joey Ryan, Willie Mack, of course. And your promotion just kept on running. When you finally lost the ability to use the NWA name, how did that feel mentally? And then how did that change your business, or did it?
It didn't change the business at all. Personally, I was really upset because I thought it was bogus to begin with. Sure. And hindsight, I think I'm right. The way the whole thing happened is, like, I'm not a big karma guy. I don't really I just don't. But think about everybody who was a part of that. Yep. And what they're doing today. And what happened to them during that process. And then think about who's on top and who's using it now. Mm-hmm. So, but personally, it did hurt. I was, not just for me, because I knew that there was a handful of guys who really wanted to make this happen. Mm-hmm. Bob Trowbridge really wanted this to go somewhere. We thought we were going to do something with Sinclair. We really did, until they wanted to own it. They wanted to buy it, and the organization wouldn't allow that. If we gave Bob the ultimate control, he had ultimate control, but I mean, if he had like veto power, and because the members could override him because he didn't own it, we did, ultimately. I think we could have gone a different way altogether, but that's not how the thing was set up. Right. But yeah, but people from within, people who, it's interesting too, because it was outside influences. People, there was one member, a few associate members, and then a guy who used to be the president many moons back. So, I mean, it's all out there. So Howard fucked us, and he got some people together, and Bruce was already talking like this. This wasn't a new conversation. I had several conversations about how can we run this together. And Bruce even called me the golden boy. Yeah. We need you because you understand television, and that's a big piece to this and where we're going to go. And all I did was ask for proof. Send me your plan. Send me the money that was in the bank, because I was hearing we have all this money in the bank. And it was one WrestleMania's when I got the phone call from Fred, Howard and Bruce. I believe they were at Chris Ronquillo's house, and I was at Angelo Trinidad's house, and we were having one of the annual WrestleMania parties, so everybody was there. I went outside to take the call, and I took the call, and I just hung the phone up. I didn't pay much attention to it, but they made the rounds, and they talked to everybody.
Wow.
It got to Trobich that they were trying to de-seat him, and everybody in Dallas thought it was me that called Bob. I didn't. It came out, it was Mike Porter. But they always thought they had Mike. Always. Mike knew how to play the game. Because Mike had a past, and they felt they had stuff on Mike.
Right.
But at that point, I don't think Mike gave a damn. So they sued us for insurance fraud, which all of those guys used the insurance. Even while they were suing us, they were still using the insurance.
Yep.
So it's all wanky, whatever. We get to the end. They get it. They hit me with a giant judgment, Bob too, and individually, personally, not just the organization. It was, I just felt really bad for the others who put maybe not money into it, but an awful lot of time.
Sure.
I was just happy that Ed Schumann was dead, because I think this would have killed him. Seriously.
That's probably the only time you've ever said that you wish Ed Schumann was dead.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that he was dead during this period, because from the stuff that Rico went on to do, and that whole mess, and 01 USA and all this shit, I don't think Ed would have been cool with any of it, because Ed was NWA, true and true.
For sure. And I remember even back in the days seeing him, I never met Ed personally, but there were, photos and articles on the old NWA website, and there Ed was in that NWA t-shirt, and he was over there always trying to hawk the NWA merchandise. I mean,
well, he was the head of the merch.
Well, that makes a lot more sense then.
And, and a lot of people probably don't know this, but he was Midwest Belts. So when you bought a belt from Reggie Parks or Dave Milliken, Rico Mann doing the design, Ed was the business guy behind that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So then that brings us to now. I mean, well, let's talk a little bit of that bygone era just for a little bit more. Because a lot of those guys that they ended up using as champions, I think you would have been comfortable with booking as well. I mean, Rob Conway was a host and a wrestler on your programs in Vegas. And it's kind of funny that he said on the first episode of that NWA Showcase show from Las Vegas that he was going to one day be NWA World Champion. And sure as shit, Dave, that guy wins a title. Now, I'm sure at the time you guys probably even had that discussion years ago that maybe he would be one of those guys considered to be NWA World Champion, but he did it, in the Trobich era, or excuse me, not in the Trobich era, in the Tharp era. He took the title to Japan, and I know you were a Rob Conway fan. I mean, at least did you feel good about seeing the NWA title on a guy like Rob Conway?
Sure, absolutely. I had the conversation for Rob Conway to be the champion, not the organization. There weren't many in the organization who I think liked that idea. But they also didn't like Blue Demon, and they also didn't like the Skull Crushers, and they also didn't like Los Luchas, and they also didn't like Colt Cabana. And for the most part, they didn't like Adam either, because he wasn't the choice.
I was about to say that. They didn't like
Brian.
Adam.
Brian was the choice.
Right.
So like that whole me suggesting champions, I think people just they really got upset that I was controlling the narrative, and when like the national title or the North American title or the U.S. tag titles or whatever the hell we had, since they weren't featured on the television, that everyone felt that I made them lesser, which I didn't, because when Pepper Parks became the national champion, he was on the show. When the Sheik was the North American champion, he was on the show. when Phil Shatter was the champion, he was on the show. I had him in there. They just weren't on every damn TV.
Yeah. Well, and to your credit too, I mean, you even booked Apollo, who was at that time the North American champion.
Well, that's right.
And Mike DiBiase, who was the
that's
North
right.
American
Well,
champion.
DiBiase was me. That was my project that imploded. That was my fault. But yeah. So, you know, it just went everywhere.
So, again, that lawsuit, that kind of defined something for the NWA, something that never happened before. It created one person, one ownership stake. And the NWA, like you said,
that's good, by the way, but keep going.
Well, I'm getting to that because I think it was good, too, in retrospect, because the NWA as a collective, like you said, couldn't even order a cup of coffee. Vince McMahon said, couldn't order a cup of coffee to save their lives. But it took Trobich losing his power, Tharp gaining his influence, and owning that brand in order to sell it to somebody who actually could do something with it. And I know that, look, there were a lot of guys who wanted to even buy the NWA when they knew that Tharp was on his way out. I mean, Billy Wood, IPW UK, he wanted to come buy the NWA.
I've heard Billy Wood. I've even talked to Andy Anderson about it. He had a group of people together to buy it. I think what's his name in the Midwest? I don't know if he's in Nashville. I guess that's the South. Carver. I think they had a group of people who were looking into doing it. I don't know how serious they were, but I know they were into it. I think even Matt Riviera had a group of people that were considering to do it. All that I know is that he would not sell it to me at all.
Right. And so Billy Corgan comes in, and for people who are familiar with Billy Corgan in wrestling, I mean, it wasn't his first rodeo. He was part of a promotion in Chicago maybe 5 or 6 years before, and he of course he comes into it with his experience and Impact, and of course his friendship with David Lagana, and your friendship with David Lagana, and this whole thing comes together pretty quick. How excited were you to know that Billy Corgan was involved with the NWA and was able to essentially bring the NWA back to where it is right now? I mean, obviously you didn't know 3 years ago what was going to happen, but clearly you knew they had some sort of game plan.
Right here?
Yeah, just to put this through.
If you give me a minute, I'll be done
here. Sorry.
They need to use this computer. No, we'll keep going.
Okay.
Billy, when he so they exit Impact as a team, and they one of I think the first places I had heard in the past through the Tharp buying those guys that Billy Corgan was going to buy it, and they had a conversation, whether it was at a CAC or something, I don't know, but they had spoke. I've never asked Billy this, but maybe they have. So I want to say it was either January or February after they exited Impact. They visited Hollywood and me. And we were just talking, nothing big. And I just remember Billy kind of saying, well, maybe we can do something together, being Billy Corrigan's resources and Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And I kind of caught right there on the spot that I don't know if we would work well together in that capacity. I can tell that he's awfully creative and he has his own mind. And, we are already, 7-8 years in. I'm not sure how he would necessarily fit outside of money, which isn't fair because that's the situation he just came out of.
Right.
So I just blurted out, the NWA's for sale. And David Lagana kind of looked at me, and Billy looked at me, and they're like, well, what are we buying? And I kind of just threw back at them. It's like, well, you're buying whatever you want to do with it. You can, those 3 letters are Unforgiven. You can, whatever you want. And I'm sure you can pick it up for a song. And they started the investigation. I put them together. with the right people on that side. And he and Tharp went back and forth, and then Lagana and Tharp went back and forth. And I basically I had the treasure map. I knew where everything was buried, and I furnished them with paperwork and everything to the WWF agreement going back to the 90s, where everyone thought the WWF owned the NWA name or something.
Thanks, Howard Brody.
Which isn't true. Well, at the time in the late 90s or whenever that was important for the NWA. Like, I wouldn't have ever got in originally, and people would probably never have even thought about it if it wasn't on the WWF shows. So Camp Corrigan and Tharp, they come to an agreement, they buy it, and then now they have to shoot some stuff and do something with it, and it took a little while, and then that's when David came up with the documentary 10-pound series, and they wanted me to be involved in some capacity, and originally it was just producing stuff with them and whatnot. I mean, I knew ultimately they were going to get to a weekly TV series. That was always the plan. Right. And so little by little, 70th anniversary event, matches appearing on Hollywood, 10 pounds of gold, and then just the conversations about doing a weekly TV. And then I showed them through a friend in Atlanta. I had already looked at the space, Georgia Public Broadcasting. I knew it was perfect for what they wanted, and they made the deal, and now we have NWA Power.
Was that Lou Seals?
Yeah.
And he's with Tough TV, right?
He owns Tough TV.
Ah. Were you guys planning on putting a show in Atlanta?
The United Wrestling Network? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a while. For a long while.
So fast forward, here we are. NWA Power had a pretty monumental rise in the last 8 months or so. I think it really caught people off guard, and I don't know that they did much different than what you were doing in Hollywood, except for maybe some of the names that they were using had a little bit more cachet. Mm-hmm. And of course, it featured the 10 pounds of gold, which through Lagana's series really kind of built up that title once again. And of course, being in All In, I really feel like hit the fast forward button for the NWA, because again, they were putting that title against an opponent who had a huge following, and that All Elite pay-per-view, the All In pay-per-view, the first one, really kind of pushed that dynamic of course, what the Bucks and Cody were doing, but as well as, hey, there's a company out here that's got a champion that's been documenting this whole thing. And this champion's been wrestling in Hollywood. The champion's been wrestling in the UK. Hey, the champion even wrestled in China. And it really, I feel like as an NWA fan, that being put with All In really kind of put a rocket onto the NWA, and I think helped it grow even faster. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised at all. I saw the excitement when we said the NWA title was coming back to the Hollywood program. Then I saw the documentary, the first episode of 10 Pounds of Gold, and it was fantastic. And I knew people were going to fall in love with Tim Storm. The name and Corrigan's name attached to it, a lot of buzz. A lot of mainstream magazines and news outlets carried the stories on the re-evolution of the brand. And I think all the negative that was out there too, of former promoters and whatnot, I think that really helped too in the narrative, where people were against Corrigan and the what did he buy? That's always been fun to me, is what did he buy? And again, that was like one of the first questions he asked, like, what is it? Right. So it's a fair question. But it is what you're going to make it. And that's all that I kept preaching. It was like, whatever you want it to be, that's what it's going to be. Was I like super shocked? No. I knew that it was going to get there, and I knew people were going to respect it and get behind it, especially from the behind the scenes of the names I saw being considered, and opponents and locations, and being a consultant that way, helping weaving through and whatnot. And that was very exciting in the very beginning.
Talking about Hollywood too, or excuse me, talking about NWA Power, excuse me, there's a lot of ties to Hollywood. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but even your relationship with Trevor Murdoch, he started off where? WLW.
World Legion Wrestling.
and then he spent time in Hollywood when you were doing the original Championship Wrestling from Hollywood TV tapings. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think the plan at the time was that Cade and Murdoch were going to square off against the Skull Crushers at some point for those NWA tag titles. That never materialized, but Trevor Murdoch is someone that's been on your radar for years, and he's worked your arena shows. He's been a part of what you've done for such a long time. And then, of course, Eli Drake has been around Hollywood. I really feel like he came into his own when he started teaming with Brian Cage and Mach 1 Wrestling. And, of course, they were the Mach 1 Tag Champions, which later became the Hollywood Heritage Tag Champions. And then the continuity that they had when you put them with Percy Pringle III, their stock just went up and up. The talent got better and better. And then, of course, they split, but both have this huge trajectory of their careers. Brian Cage is doing his thing. Eli Drake has been TNA World Champion. He's been Impact World Champion, and now he's a part of the NWA as the Tag Team Champion with James Storm. And even little things like bringing in guys like D-Man Parker, who's been a part of what you've been doing recently. There's a lot of Hollywood influence in what you guys are doing, and that's in front of the camera. But then behind the camera, you producing the 70th anniversary show, Billy working, directing the show. I mean, these are your guys, Dave, and there's so much of David Marquez in this NWA Power. How do you feel knowing that you've had this kind of impact on this brand that literally you've been a part of for about 30 years?
No, it's cool. There's no other way to put it. It's awfully cool. Some people may debate you on my influence on the show, which is fair. But Billy Trask, a name that a lot of people might only know at the end of the show if they watch the credits. Billy is also the director of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And before that, he was my technical director as I directed the show. And before that, he played the music back and created the graphics on the big screens. And before that, he was doing moonsaults at the Wrestle Center.
Wow.
So we taught him what to do, and he's an excellent director. You say Dan Parker. The neat thing about a guy like Dan Parker is he's a great utility guy. Not only is he a talent in the ring, but he understands the fundamentals of production. The last go around, I don't think the last ones we did, the Superpower thing that's coming out tomorrow, but the recording before that, before Christmas, I think, or the Christmas episodes, D-Man Dan Parker was the floor director.
Okay.
He was the stage manager. And Billy Corrigan had nothing but great things to say about him, and that we create top guys. And that even goes for from the WWE side of it, like Giancarlo Ditmo, who started with us, who's a big producer there now of content, and Adam Pierce, who's a big producer there now. And it goes on and on and on. And then the broadcast announcers and people who have come out of us who are WWE talents now and elsewhere. So I feel really good about my association with the NWA and pro wrestling altogether. At times, I tend to forget that I've done something because I've been doing it so long. And when I hear stuff like this and have these memories, it's like, yeah, I guess I did do something good and lasting, which I guess is what life's about. I guess leaving a mark, and I've been lucky enough to be able to do that in pro wrestling. So, and then Lagana himself, right after his WWE job, he came and worked right for us at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. Right. He was in creative and producing. So it's all in the family. And just like families, we fight and we bicker and we kiss and make up and we have birthdays and holidays and everything. So it's a great time. I didn't think I was going to be in the position that I am in on Power That was a shock. I thought I was going to be strictly behind the scenes. And I thought I was directing the show at first. Personally, I thought I would be directing. And when they asked me to do on-camera stuff, I think I originally said no. I have a memory problem too, so it's difficult for me to do that job. Right. I can't remember short-term things, and it's very difficult for me to, especially it's hard enough for me to remember storylines on my show, and now I'm expected to remember storylines for 8 or 9 weeks of TV that I didn't write or have anything to do with.
Right.
And stuff's just being thrown at you, and literally people in your ear say this, you know, and I already have notes prepared, and then those notes are no longer any good because something has changed, and you know, it's at first I said no, but it's a great role, and I think, and I'm also a consultant still and producing still and stuff like that. But when people recognize that role and they say I'm doing a good of job as Solie or Gene Okerlund or something, that's pretty nice to see.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time, and Dave, I literally could talk to you for hours and hours, and I don't think either one of us would get too bored. I hope we can do this again real soon. Yeah. Maybe when the show kicks back on, we could start talking about Hollywood and NWA Power moving forward. Yeah. But I do really appreciate your time. If people want to follow Dave Marquez, the personality, and Dave Marquez, the person, how can they find you? What can they do? Well,
social media at CWFH Marquez. I'm David Marquez on Facebook, but I usually don't take new people. There's what Jason said. There's the television guy, David Marquez, and then there's the real person. And if you like the television guy, you might not like the real person. So you might want to just stick to Instagram and Twitter and stuff, because I try to be in character mostly there. And then HollywoodWrestling.com, UnitedWrestlingTV.com, I think, Championship Wrestling from Arizona. And then we have neat things like pins.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I was one of the guys who started the pin craze, too. And now everybody's doing them. But I think mine are the best.
Let's see. Well, that's not yours. I have a couple of yours.
Yeah, you do.
Right here.
Yeah.
And let's see. I've got this one too.
Not many people have that one.
Yeah, that I handed it out to a few people. I won't hand out anymore. And I think I've got this one's one of my favorite ones.
Yep.
And you guys really should check out those pins.
And this is the United TV title.
And I'll make sure to put a link to that in the video. And that's on my list. The best thing
is I don't think the eBay link is working. The best place to put that is info@hollywoodwrestling.com. And just send me a PayPal. They're $15. And when you send that, don't forget to add your address, and that's included postage. Send it friends and family. If you don't, when they take the fees out, I'm not sending it.
So again, Dave, I thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate this, and of course, I wish you nothing but the best and all the success in the future for not just the NWA, but also Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and the United Wrestling Network. And of course, the next time we talk, I want to talk about the next United Wrestling Network World Heavyweight Champion.
Well, I would too. We got to figure that out.
Well, again, thanks for being here, and everyone, thank you for tuning in. Of course, you can follow me at the Alliance blog, and that's where you're going to get all your social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, TikTok. Dave, you need a TikTok.
No.
And remember, visit alliance-wrestling.com, your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance and the United Wrestling Network. This is Jay Cal, and I'll see you guys at the matches. Thanks, Dave.